I'm very excited because not only do I have a very talented author with me, but also a dear friend of mine, Jodi Siegel Wing. She wrote The Art of Social War, which is based on, and I'll let you explain.
Well, I always say that, and this is how Diana and I had first met on Cosmolicious, because I always like to say that I write about very bad behavior and girl-on-girl crime.
Yes.
And really, this is funny stuff. And, you know, I had been forced to relocate at gunpoint to Hollywood about 8 years ago, and
not literally.
Not well.
Not literally.
Well, kind of. I mean, I married a great guy, and we sort of landed in that 2% of the 2% of the Hollywood kind of film cast. And I realized almost immediately I had landed in Girl World 2.0, which is all that kind of crazy stuff you thought you were done with in middle school. But oh no. It's just more subtle and more crazy, and of course
more passive-aggressive.
More passive-aggressive, and Hollywood being Hollywood, people's arsenals of psychological evisceration were of a much higher level. So sort of the book is a novel, and it's funny, it's a satire, it's a throwdown, and it's also based on Sun Tzu's The Art of War, which is a 2,500-year-old military treatise, and it's really about overcoming very bad behavior and girl-on-girl crime.
And there is very bad behavior, and if you're someone who has been a bully, has been bullied, this is the time to share your stories, and perhaps Jodi can offer some advice with how you can maybe deal with bullying in the workplace, maybe bullying within your own social circle. And the way that we do that here is easy at Paltalk. If you have a microphone, you can raise your hand, metaphorically speaking, and we will come right to you and hear what you have to say. And if you don't, that's fine too, because you can text in your questions. Going a little bit more into the art of social war, what is one of the main things you see people doing to each other within a social construct?
Right. Well, one of the things that I thought was so interesting in that I wrote a satire. It's funny. I mean, it really, you know, it's thinly veiled and all that kind of stuff with all the good Hollywood throwdowns and scandals. But what I thought was so interesting is as soon as the book was released, the messaging that came back was very nonfiction. And so while the details were very specific to Hollywood and this particular age group and all that sort of thing, I started getting letters from readers ages 16 to 85 saying, oh, you know, you cannot believe what goes on at Bridge Club. You can't believe the mommy wars. You know, the slut shaming that goes on in the sororities and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, a lot of it was very funny and a lot of it was very sad and also very relatable because, I mean, anything from sitting in a brainstorm meeting with your colleagues and your ingenious idea, you know, sort of gets met with a deafening wall of silence and the eye volley, you know, where you sort of feel, you know, it's just that feel of humiliation or shame or fear or anxiety, but it's not so different from kids on the playground.
Right, and I mean, I don't think that bullying or social aggression or passive aggressiveness it ever stops. I think it's something, like you said, goes from the sandbox all the way to the grave. And I don't know why we do this to each other. You know, one of my biggest messages and something that I just wrote about today on one of my advice columns is just be nice to each other. It's so simple and it sounds almost elementary, but what do you really gain from breaking someone down? You're not building them up. I mean, you're cutting them to the core. What does that say about you? It just reflects so poorly, and I think that Jodi makes such a good point about how women and men, they get better at it. They kind of know how to not make themselves look bad because they're like, well, did you hear that she did? Yes, she had sex with that man. And I mean, it's almost like you're passing such judgment and you're gossiping at the same time. You're doing it in I'm holier than thou.
Right. Well, social aggression is really emotional violence. I mean, and you know, it exists on a scale from on a continuum from mild to extreme. But all of those sort of you know, shunning and exclusion and, you know, really kind of interpersonal aggression. I think, you know, women and men aren't that different. They just have different experiences. And I think it's because, and this is part of my new book, which is really about using the art of war to resolve conflict. And it is going to be called The Art of War Experiment, Prepare to Triumph and Become Invincible.
Wow.
And it's funny, you know, it is the art of war for women, but it's also kind of like he's just not that into you. and will combine many of these war stories, which are entirely universal, and how to overcome. And I think it goes back to our socialization as girls and women, where we are not really encouraged to confront directly. I mean, women and girls are just as, can be as anxious or fearful or angry as boys, but we're just not taught to sort of like duke it out on the soccer field and leave it there.
Well, it's interesting. I actually was thinking about this. I have a 3-month-old niece who's absolutely adorable, and I love her more than anything, but I realized that the language we were using with her was just so socially constructed in a sense where we kept going, "You're a good girl, you're a good girl." And
who's the prettiest?
I got it.
Who's the prettiest princess?
And honestly, like, I'm so careful with that with her, because I'm like, I don't want to do that. Don't want to do that to her. And I'll be like, "But you're so smart. But you're so smart." And savvy. But even speaking with her and in that tone, I realized, okay, I have to stop saying "you're a good girl, you're a good girl" to her, because that is not necessarily an attribute that is positive.
Well, I think it's part of the culture that we as girls sort of face, and we learn very early on to look for our self-worth in terms of what other people deeming you so, getting gold stars for other people, because, and that's
marrying the right man.
And being the good girl. I call it good girl syndrome, and too many of us suffer from it, because I always think about it like the filter heads on showers, that restrict the water flow. And this is the thing, I mean, why women aren't promoted more, why women don't ask for more resources in the workplace. It's because of past negative experiences, and we're taught to be competent without complaint. We're caught in all these dual binds where, you're supposed to be a good girl, and you will be somehow recognized for that and rewarded thusly. And then when it doesn't happen, I think that we all, it's almost like the unraveling begins, because you either blame yourself.
Right. You're like, I did everything right. Why did I get it?
Or you blame others and you become angry. And it's really kind of a no-win. And I think we really need to take a look at ourselves and learn to empower ourselves using words, so that, because the most important thing we have is a voice, and a voice, because we can be assertive without being aggressive. And it's a fine line, but it's really all about having peace of mind in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. Noannie has a question for us. She wants to know where they can buy your book.
Well, I suppose at many bookstores, but also Amazon.com is just as good a place. Plus, I like anything that comes to the house.
Yeah,
I do.
Anything you don't have to go out for.
Exactly. Anything you can point and click, I'm like the happiest person.
Jodi knows that in one of my previous work situations, I was extremely bullied. And I was constantly feeling like I was on the offense and the defense.
But walking on eggshells. Yeah, and for what? Because you don't know.
Miserable every day.
I always feel like, it's like that, it's that North Star parable where, sailors have sort of mapped the seas for centuries using the stars. Because when you get off course, when you start trying to please this one and that one, it's like following the love of a bad boyfriend.
Right.
I mean, we all know that, because I mean, it's like you're just looking for any kind of acceptance. It's almost like you change yourself based on someone else's mood of the day.
And eventually that catches up with you, because if you're not true to who you are, whether you're a talk show host or you're a chemist, it is going to reflect in your work in a way that's
interpersonal relationships.
Exactly.
And I think, the hard part, especially being a woman, even though you're a brilliant chemist, the hard part is actually being able to sit this guy down in one of his better moments and say, I am feeling these things from you. If you see something wrong with my work, I'd really appreciate if you could say, this is what's going wrong and why, and here's what I would do. Here's how you could make it better. I don't know why, but it really is true. For women, it's very hard for us to have that conversation.
And I also think, too, with that conversation, especially where there's a male-female dynamic, is that everybody is so afraid of being accused of sexual harassment if it's on, on the male side.
But it's interesting then that it's a guy who's throwing her under the bus.
And then the women, on the other hand, never want to look like they're complaining, because, for the women who have been whistleblowers, let's say, we see that they always kind of just disappear. I mean, there has been numerous cases that have been kind of, immediately when you look at, let's say, I'll even say Rachel Yucatel. Maybe that's not the best example, but she was apparently a mistress or in some way allegedly in cahoots with Tiger Woods. And the next thing you knew, everybody was saying things about Tiger Woods, but she was really enemy number one.
She was enemy number one. But and this is the thing. I think that the rules in girl world and for women's behavior are so hazy, but you break any one of them, and the punishment is very, very harsh indeed.
Right.
And I think it really is interesting how women get so maligned. I mean, Hillary Clinton is a brilliant stateswoman, and she gets maligned because of the way she looks. I mean, which you can't have it both ways.
And the fact that she didn't divorce Bill Clinton, and that she must be power hungry.
Oh, and that she has bad hair.
Right,
I mean, really.
right. And I think that is something that as women we constantly fight. It's like, if you are going to be in any kind of position where people can judge you, which I think is every position. I mean, even as mothers, I was watching, and I'm sorry for admitting this, I was watching The Real Housewives of the OC the other night with my mom and my sister.
Don't be sorry, it's monitoring. You're monitoring.
And yes, and pop culturally monitoring. And I remember just watching this, and at one point wanting to turn it off because there was two mothers who were talking about their 1-year-olds, going like, well, does she know how to say Ola? And she's like, is she going to get into that preschool? I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. I'm like, these are your kids. This isn't a puppy.
Japanese.
Right.
Mine went to the CIA and can cook French food.
Right. And she's only a year and a half. It's all me.
Right.
Like, well, why don't you work on maybe yourself and stop living vicariously through your children? I feel like every single place is monitored to, how many bottles a day are you giving them versus are you breastfeeding or aren't you? Are you working mom or are you staying home mom?
At 6 months?
Yeah. Right. It's like, my God, can we just stop the pressure? Shouldn't these things be the best parts of our lives and not be going, stop.
Yeah.
Life is too short.
But I think that's when it comes back down with all this interpersonal conflict. And look, the world is in the middle of I don't know how many wars.
How many crises are going on?
Japan has blown up, and Haiti has blown up, and I heard last night there was an earthquake in LA, so I'm happy to be here in New York at the moment.
Yeah, and Libya, and
but this is the kind of stuff that keeps you up at night. Why did your coworkers sort of sell you out? What did you do? And you sit there and dissect, and then, of course, come up with all the brilliant one-liners that you would have used.
Right.
If you weren't, numb and immobilized,
And plus, it's
and that's why I had to write about it, because it was like, it's almost like a catharsis.
And it is also social warfare in the sense that you have to be very plotting about how you're going to have your tactics and your strategies, and you can't just go in there without a game plan. You have to know how to deal with someone's psychological, makeup and how they're going to react and how you're going to react, and ultimately it's just not the situations, it's how that you are reacting to them, and it's very difficult.
And that's the whole point. And Sun Tzu would say, that you really have to study the entire nature of the conflict to understand any of it, but to know yourself, to do a real self-assessment of your weak points and your strong, and the other people with whom you're interacting with, and then the environment at large.
Right.
And really come up with a detailed plan for yourself.
And there's been times, I'm sure that many of you out there have been bullied in many different scenarios, and you feel like, can't we just, shake hands, call a truce, and have an olive branch and call it a day? And unfortunately, you might have those face-to-face, sure, everything's good, and that person's still going to continue to try to dig your grave.
But you owe it to yourself to have the sit down, to really get yourself together, and even if you have to bullet point it, do it, because what you want to do is prevent any escalation.
Right.
Because this is the stuff that goes way out of hand. And I mean, this is the thing about reality television. And yes, it is pop culture, because it's really just a funhouse mirror of what's going on.
Right.
And yes, everybody is drenched in alcohol, which does not help.
Oh, of course.
I mean, French manicures fly, which is the fun part of it. But if you boil it down, whether it's, crazy Gaddafi in Libya or warring OC housewives, the rift is the rift. Everybody feels, there's such a strong sense of justice versus injustice, the dis. And from the Jersey Shore, I mean, at any age group, Rock of Love Bus. I mean, any prize like Bret Michaels.
Because he's the biggest prize there is, ladies.
What is under that bandana?
Why did I never take him up on his advances is beyond me.
I think we need to get him in here for a Paltalk. Can we do that? We can do the big reveal.
Oh, you can get Jodi's book on Amazon, The Art of Social War. You can also find it on the website, theartofsocialwar.com, and also
in bookstores.
And bookstores.
Yeah.
And thank you, Jodi. It's
Thank
been
you so much, Diana.
great conversation, and thank you all out there. And we will be back soon with a new show on Paltalk. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.